October is upon us, so let's talk about some horror movies. First up, we have Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola movie from 1992. First things first, I love the music, beginning to end. Alright, this movie opens with some narration, and I'm more of a show, don't tell guy. But if we're going to have narration, then at least it's Van Helsing. It makes sense that he would have learned all this. I like the stylized battle here. It makes this part of the movie feel kind of lost to history. Like the only way you're going to get this information is if somebody tells you. In fact, this whole opening just says, I have faith in my audience. This puppet show style turns out to be an animation theme once they get to 1897. It's shown very briefly, and I think it's a great idea to use that for telling the opening story. Van Helsing, in fact, narrates multiple scenes before he actually shows up. That's a happy midpoint between spoon feeding and not giving you enough to work with. And then we get to Keanu Reeves. I'm not sure how I feel about Keanu Reeves' voice. It strikes me as a little weird, but it doesn't kill the movie for me. It might be pretty good. I don't know various English accents, but I'm just going to go with it. I do love how staged everything in this movie is, though. Nothing really feels like you're actually there experiencing it, but it does feel weird. Sort of like if you're in close proximity to an undead monster, so probably a pretty intentional vibe. There's a lot of neat visual stuff. There's an effect early on where Dracula touches Jonathan from like 6 feet away, helping him into the carriage. I'm not crazy about that particular scene, but I do appreciate them trying to incorporate that feel from the novel. The blue fire, on the other hand, they could have just skipped that. So whatever. But I absolutely love the shadow consistently moving separately from Dracula. And then we have Dracula himself. Gary Oldman is ridiculous in this movie. I mean, he's always good, but he kills it in this one. And of course, the costumes and the makeup, they really help. And I'm not one to focus on costumes, but this movie definitely has the best costumes of any movie I've ever seen. Since they're playing up the romance with Mina and Dracula in this one, the movie does a good job early on of establishing that Mina wishes she were appreciated, and Jonathan doesn't think enough of himself to appreciate her. And of course, it doesn't get a lot of screen time in the actual film, but the conclusion to that, of course, is that Jonathan eventually does marry her and is willing to fight to the death to protect her. So it's kind of a character arc, got a little stuffed in there, but Jonathan's not really the main focus of this version. So that's really to point out that even the periphery characters have some really, really good development and some real flesh to them. Then, of course, we have one of the best lines. Listen to them, the children of the night, what sweet music they make. Obviously, it's Dracula referring to the sound of howling wolves, and it really explains who Dracula is. Speaking of characters acting within an established nature, I think I'd seen this movie multiple times before I realized the sisters were actually entrancing Jonathan from a distance. I think I just thought it was weird at first, like, oh, this guy's an idiot. He's going to go lay down in another part of the castle right after being told not to. But no, that's not it. It's the vampire hoodoo at work here. And if you actually pay attention, which I think it took me a few viewings to really pay attention because I had to get past the weird first. Plus, I was pretty young the first time I saw it. But you realize it's so much of this movie is making the vampires just not fit in to the natural world. They aren't just undead creatures with powers. Just everything around them gets distorted. And this scene I'm talking about actually works in a good maniacal laugh. A lot of times, maniacal laughter should be reserved for cartoons, but it works here because Dracula's laughing at how horrified Jonathan is once he realizes Dracula is in fact a monster. And that scene kicks off a montage that demonstrates how powerful Dracula is because Mina and Lucy feel his presence all the way across the ocean. Of course, Renfield feels his presence. He's working for Dracula. They have a mental connection. The other inmates in Jack's asylum feel his presence. Storms just pop up around him. And Dracula's wolf form is one of the absolute freakiest things I've ever seen in a movie. The bat form is good. It's good effects work. But the creepiness of this wolf form is a lot of fun for me. And I just realized on this viewing, I think part of what makes Gary Oldman so good is that he doesn't just use an accent. He seems like he's genuinely trying to think of the words to use in a foreign language. His rhythm is just perfect. But everybody's rhythm is perfect. The timing of the movie itself really strikes me. I don't know if the editor gets most of the credit for that or if that's actually on Coppola, but every scene seems to linger just a tiny bit beyond the action of the scene, like some kind of punctuation mark, like it's asking, hey, did you catch all that? Another thing I didn't catch the first few times I saw this movie, I found Mina's connection to Dracula a little off-putting, like how she sticks with him even after she knows he's a monster. But that's because of Dracula's skillful manipulation. But it's also because of like hypnotism and weird vampire mental connection things, as shown in those scenes where they talk about his family history. It's not just Mina being stupid or being manipulated. Also, I kind of want Quincy's rifle in this movie. I think it's a Henry 44, but the action is gold-plated and it looks really cool. Not that it does much in this movie because, vampire. Speaking of which, I love the concept of what a vampire is in this movie. The weird things that happen around them and the crazy powers they have and just the sheer depth of power they have. I wouldn't want that in every vampire story, but I am digging it in this one. I also get a kick out of Van Helsing's attitude in this movie. For instance, he's talking about Lucy, who has passed away, and he says, yeah, she was in great pain. Then we cut off her head and put a stake through her heart and burned her. Then she found peace. It's basically the opposite of his demeanor in the novel, but man, it's funny. And it makes sense for a character in his position to be like that, I think. Then the third act is really solid. Feels like a different movie almost because of all the action, but it really is just a straight adaptation of the novel from what I can remember until Mina delivers the final blow at the end, since in this version they had her playing the conflicted lover rather than just a hostage. I can easily see how this movie would not be for everyone, but I love it. It's long, it is relentlessly weird. I could even see it being slow if you're not curious where it's going, but this has to be my favorite movie to look at. This is my favorite movie, visually speaking. The costumes, the colors, the character design, the stylized, staged presentation, the makeup, the eerie sets, especially the lighting on those sets, especially for the finale. I love it all. Plus, it's a solid story, very similar to the original novel. I watch this movie over and over again, probably at least once a year. So Bram Stoker's Dracula is getting a 5 out of 5 from me.